Hello, welcome to Biotanemy.
Infections. An infection can simply be the invasion and multiplication of microbes like bacteria, parasites, and viruses that are normally not present in our body. The infections can be classified into 1. Primary infections are the initial infection caused by a parasite in our body. 2. Reinfection, if the same parasite infects the same host again. 3. Secondary infections, if a new parasite infects a host or person whose resistance is lowered by a pre-existing infectious disease. 4. Focal infections, is the localized infections caused in different sites such as the appendix, tonsils, etc. 5. Cross-infections, if a sick person gets a new infection from another external source or host. 6. Nosocomial infections, if the cross-infection occurs in a hospital. 7. Iatrogenic infections are the infections induced by physicians during investigative, therapeutic, or other procedures in the hospital. 8. Based on the clinical effects of infections, they are classified into inapparent infections and atypical infections. Inapparent infection, often called a subclinical infection, where an infection caused have no or few signs or symptoms, but can transmit from one host to another. A well-known example is typhoid Mary. And atypical infections that are caused by a different bacterium than the usual ones. Example: atypical pneumonia caused by Chlamydia pneumoniae, Mycoplasma pneumoniae, and Legionella pneumonia. It has milder symptoms than typical pneumonia. 9. Depending on the source, the infections are classified into endogenous or exogenous. 10. Latent infections. In latent infections, the parasites remain in the host tissues in a latent or hidden form for a period of time. They will proliferate and produce clinical disease when the resistance of the host is lowered. Now let's talk about the sources of infection. Different organisms and materials can act as a source of infections. Some of the carriers that can be mentioned are: A. Humans. We humans are one of the important sources of infection. A carrier or patient can act as a carrier. Carriers are persons who carry pathogens in their bodies without displaying any symptoms. The carriers again can be classified into different types. They are: 1. Healthy carriers. These are the ones who carry the pathogens, but have never suffered from the disease caused by those pathogens. 2. Convalescent carriers. They are the one who has just recovered from the disease, but continues to carry the pathogen in his body. 3. Depending on the carriage duration, they are classified into temporary carrier and chronic carrier. A temporary carrier is a person who carries a pathogen for less than 6 months. And chronic carriers are the ones who carry pathogens for a very long period. It may last for several years or decades. For contact carrier, a person who gets a pathogen from a patient. 5. Paradoxical carrier. A person acquires pathogens from another carrier. B. The next carriers to be mentioned are animals. Many pathogens can infect both animals and human beings. The diseases transmitted by animals to human beings are known as zoonoses. Most of the time the infection in animals is asymptomatic. They can still spread disease, or they act as a reservoir for infections. Hence, are called reservoir hosts. Example: rats can spread plague, dogs can spread rabies and hydatiid disease, and cats can spread toxoplasmosis. C. Insects. The insects that suck blood from humans can cause arthropod-borne disease. The insects that spread disease are known as vectors. Depending on the mode of transmission, they can be classified into mechanical vectors and biological vectors. Mechanical vectors are insects that will pick up pathogens from the outside of their body and then transmit them through physical contact. And the biological vectors are the insects that will allow the pathogens to multiply in their body and be delivered to the new host through biting. D. Soil and water. Soil and water are a major source of microbes. For example, bacterial spores can remain viable in the soil for decades. The water-derived infection includes cholera. E. Food. Contaminated food can act as a source of infection. Example, salmonellosis. These infections can be transmitted through different ways. They are 1. Contact transmission. The diseases transmitted through contact are known as contagious diseases. The contagious disease that can be transmitted through direct contact with patients is known as an infectious disease. The contagious disease can also be spread through indirect contact with inanimate objects. These inanimate objects carrying infectious agents are known as fomites. 2. Inhalation. Patients infected with pathogens such as influenza and tuberculosis can transmit their infections to other people by shedding them into the air by sneezing, coughing, and speaking. 3. Ingestion. Certain infections like cholera, food poisoning, or dysentery are induced by ingestion of contaminated food or water. 4. Inoculation. Some pathogens are directly inoculated into the tissues of the host. For example, tetanus, rabies, HIV, hepatitis B, etc. 5. Congenital. Congenital infections are vertically transmitted from mother to child through the placenta.
Thank you. Please like, subscribe and share. See you again in a new topic.